So, hello everyone, and welcome to this Sportradar Connect panel. This is around maximising the future of marketing. And allow me to introduce myself. I'm Adam Azor. I'm the EVP Global Marketing at Sportradar. And I'm very conscious this is the last session before you get to have a tour of this beautiful stadium and a tour of the beautiful bar next to this area as well. So we are going to make this session insightful, entertaining, bring some energy into the conversation. And this is about the future of marketing, and obviously I think any marketing event at the moment, it's contractually obliged to talk about technology and AI, so here we are. But we're aiming to make this session less about the tick list, latest hot piece of AI technology, and more about what it actually means for marketeers and marketing leadership. And to have this conversation, I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Lisa Ravenscroft, who is going to introduce herself in a much better way than I would. So, Lisa, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Yeah, I'm Lisa Ravenscroft, and I've been a career marketer, always on the brand side, and I got into the game in a weird way. And I sort of don't trust anybody who ever says that they always planned to have a long career in marketing, so I won't claim that. I was studying economics, and I was really enjoying this neat idea that people are rational and do rational things with their time and money. And then I looked around and met some real humans and realized that's not actually the case. And from there, with a kind of interest in just people and why they do what they do, I got into marketing and spent a bunch of time in BT and Vodafone, so big brands selling boring things like phone lines and broadband to begin with. And then I got to the fun stuff, which is working at William Hill. And so I had my foray into the highly regulated, much more fast-paced, much bigger budgets world of betting and gaming. And now I work in property development marketing, so I'm CMO for a private business, and now I'm selling into the public sector and buyers of homes and investors. So I kind of tour traversing lots of different kinds of irrational humans doing interesting things, and that's what I think is fun about what we do.
So firstly, Lisa, I must admit, I am one of these weird people that did want to work in marketing, so maybe I shouldn't be trusted. Yeah. But I think what's interesting, what's interesting for the people in the audience is you've got that experience of coming from big, massive brands into the betting and gaming world, and also then back out. And just reflecting on that, what is your reflections about going into betting and gaming and to go back out and the learnings between the two?
Yeah, so I learned such a lot from my time in betting and gaming. It was a period in the industry's kind of evolution where at William Hill we were grappling with the big shift to omni-channel, really. It was how do we bring together retail and all of these digital products that had different levels of kind of energy and investment and pace that they attracted, actually. So there was a kind of internal challenge about how those parts of the marketing universe work together and mutually reinforce one another. And then there was the customer challenge of what's that experience and can we do it and how quickly can we do it. The other big bow wave that was happening at that time was a bunch of regulation. So the industry was starting to self-regulate through the Senate group, and then you have all of this interesting dynamic of competitors trying to align on the same thing around a very human problem around responsible gaming and gambling. What are the people meant to do? What's the technology meant to do? Is it a compliance issue? Is it an ethical issue? So a really kind of tender and interesting time in the evolution of the sector that I was lucky enough to kind of work through and live through. And coming out of it into a different sector entirely, I think what I've taken is just that interest in what is technology's job and what is the human job that is enmeshed within it. I think that's really what I took from that time.
And just on the topic of disruption, Lisa, because you mentioned regulatory and some of the legal implications for marketeers. We're going to talk a lot about AI and technology and disruption. And before we get to that point, there is a parallel with regulatory and disruption, especially for the betting and gaming industry. And just to reflect on that point, do you see those links in terms of how, as a marketeer, you had to look at regulatory impacts and changes, and then how you navigate those waters, probably through the waters we're all going to have to navigate over the next few years due to technology disruption?
Yeah, so I think we're in an era, we're in the latest phase of disruption, aren't we? I think, rumors of marketing's demise are frequently overstated, right? I think this is a sector. If I talk to colleagues who work in other elements of business, I'm constantly reminded that I think we have to be resilient, we have to be surfers of waves. I think that's kind of what goes with the job. Every era of my career that I've been in, it's the marketers that are having these conversations before other functions of other parts of businesses, because there is a reinvention of what it is that we're doing kind of constantly. So I would say yes. I think particularly what I would take from the parallel on the legal and regulatory changes and the tech changes is how important it is to be clear on who's doing what. So if I think back to that period of time where suddenly the kind of performance marketing element of William Hill had to have better and more involved and more collaborative conversations with the public affairs team. I mean, prior to that, we were in different buildings. Never the twain shall meet. You do you, I'll do me. And suddenly, the collective fortunes were completely intertwined, and it just required a different human dynamic. So I think the parallel is how intentional are we being about what the change is and what it requires of different people. You don't adapt by accident.
Yeah, definitely. And we are in the midst of probably one of the biggest evolutions that marketing has seen at the moment, with the impact of technology, and specifically around the impact of AI and generative AI. This is, as we'll probably start to talk a little bit more about, the latest iteration of change and technology disruption over the last couple of decades in marketing. But more broadly, when you look at the impact of technology and AI on marketing, more overarching, what is your approach when it comes to managing the impact and thinking about the implementation of new technology when it comes to ways of working and function, form, budgeting? How do you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, we're in an interesting place, aren't we? Because I think about it in two ways, that you've got the sort of operational elements of AI that are getting quite mature now. And what I see the opportunity there is, it's waste reduction, it's error reduction. It's just like the advent of programmatic reduces a whole bunch of waste in media buying. This is the same trend on steroids, right? So the waste reduction element of marketing, I think, is all around a positive. It basically reduces what I would say bad work, uninspiring work, and automates that and creates the opportunity for more inspiring work. And I think that's the general historical trend, is these big disruptions tend to reduce bad work within the economy and create the opportunity for stuff that is more generative and interesting. So I welcome that. And that's everything from an AI tool that helps you to grab knowledge more easily. It just takes away the faff, takes away the waste. I think there's nothing to fear there, would be my take. That is another evolution in technology reducing waste, good thing. The bit that's more worthy of our pondering and our endeavor is the challenge of the kind of generative AI. So what is the actual implication where if the oft-trodden out thing is the waste stuff goes away, we get to do creative stuff. What happens when the creative stuff is now something that we need to be deploying tools? That's the stuff that's brand new, I think. That's the stuff that we don't yet have a mental model for who does what.
Yeah, and I actually want to just go back to your point around points of disruption, moments in time. And if we actually, I look back at my career, I actually see there's been 3 major moments in my marketing career where there's moments of disruption. So the first one was the advent of digital. So when I first started, print was, it sounds crazy, print was dominant, right? Print was a very powerful mechanic along with direct marketing. Digital came in and disrupted that straight away, as we're all getting our head around it. That was a very interesting moment, not just in terms of how we had to channel plan, but also the dynamics of agencies with remits and how marketing was done. Then you kind of supercharge that with social media, which really kind of cut through as another disruption. That was another example of, right, as marketeers, how are we agile, how are we pivoting, what does it mean? And then the third one for me was programmatic, as you mentioned. And programmatic is a really interesting one, as in not an exact like for like about where we are with AI at the moment, but certainly heavily on the machine learning and technology. It's almost silent disruptor that we don't really talk about, but absolutely revolutionized marketing. You know, I literally look at people and say, if you haven't been taking advantage of programmatic, and it happens more often than you think, what are you doing? You're literally wasting money. You are throwing away budget. You're not hitting the right audiences. So now as we go into this AI revolution, because it's buzzy, because it's more broader than marketing, we really need to think about the effectiveness and the learnings that came from programmatic and its implementation into channel planning, ways of working, expertise. So what does AI and generative AI now mean?
Well, when you're having those programmatic conversations, I love this idea that you're going in saying, hang on, you're wasting a bunch of money. What's the barrier? What are you coming up against? Because that might be the parallel. What's stopping people? Because to you, you're sort of saying, QED, why wouldn't you?
I think, first and foremost, in marketing, bravery is a really important quality, right? And when you're trying to do change, there's people that have been getting marginal gains for many years. For them to then evolve and take a change, it's a risk. So firstly, you need the level of bravery to make those changes. Secondly, I think there's an educational job about the real benefits. I think for a good period of time, there was a very legitimate brand safety challenge with programmatic, and especially in FMCG businesses and brands, they struggled a little bit with some of the programmatic delivery, but all of those problems have been solved now. So quite simply now, you take away the brand safety point, especially if you're in betting and gaming. It's like, if I've got a budget of 10 million, I want that budget to be going against people that can make a bet. I don't want to be wasting it. So yes, I may even get to sports fans, but I don't just want to be at sports fans, I want to be hitting bettors or prospective bettors. So the ability to be targeted and to get into that depth, if you're not doing that, you're making a mistake. You know, we're very lucky at Sportradar. We've got Sportradar ads, it's been talked about before in the acquisition, but the ability to cut your CPAs, get to the right audience is something which, if you're not doing it, you need to be doing. The question is going to be is with generative AI, the real impact for me right now is on the creative side and the content creation, which for me is going to be one of the bigger disruptions.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, so your question then is, how do you help cultivate bravery, or how do you listen to those barriers and support people over them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, look, it takes a bit for leadership, and people need to be leading by example. We're going to have a number of senior marketeers here in the audience, and you all have a responsibility as well to foster that culture of bravery and understanding, is to lead the way. And look, you don't have to jump in with 2 feet and throw all your budget, but how I'm making sure that I'm planning my budget in the right way to experiment. You know, I worked for a number of years as agency side for Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola have a very famous model about how they structure their budget. It's 70, 20, 10. So 70% of their budget is on guaranteed marginal gains, proven channels. 20% was orientated towards newer and emerging channels, which have been around a little bit but aren't completely tested in the way that the 70 are. The final 10% was used for completely new. And the theory behind that is 90% of that would all fail. But the idea is you're discovering within that 10% the emerging channels and technologies that will ultimately move down that funnel, that then become part of the 20 and then ultimately become part of the 70. Now, when you're working for Coca-Cola and you're spending hundreds and hundreds of millions, the 10%, that's quite a large chunk of money. If you're Panda Cola, that 10% isn't necessarily going to give you as much experimentation. So I think the question is right now, as we're going into an era of change, of evolution, what in our budgets is the right figure? How do we make sure we allocate budget to experiment? Because we do need to experiment. Anyone who tells you they have the answers for the next few years, they do not. So how do we make sure we navigate those waters and invest in the right way?
Yeah, I like it. And that point on what are you procuring from who, I think where that speaks to me is if I think about different points being brand side and going, what am I buying and from who? There are times when I sort of know what I'm getting and I'm in the middle of a planning cycle and I'm driving for value from my agencies. Like, I'm really about, there's not a huge amount of upside to capture. I'm worrying about the downside and I want value from a known provider, so that will influence how I choose agencies. And I wonder whether we're in a moment now where that's not the game. You're actually looking for buying into people rather than solutions, because I don't know what I'm going to need in the world you're describing in kind of 18 months' time. So that's an interesting one for me is, what point are you at in the maturity of what you're doing, and how does that influence what you're buying? Do I know the solution and I want it, frankly, faster, cheaper, more frictionless, whatever that value exchange is? Or am I saying, hold me by the hand and walk me into a new world, educate me, and just being really honest as the client about where am I at? The kind of worst mistakes I've made are where I've got it wrong in terms of where my organization is at, in terms of what it's buying.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic when we talk about sort of the agency and the client side. And I spent the majority of my career before Sportradar agency side. So I've been 6 years now moving client side, and I have a very interesting, poacher turned gatekeeper view on agencies. But I wanted just to drill into your perspective in the fact that now we're moving into a time of disruption and change. And look, for most people in this audience, agencies do play a really important role in our go-to-market, whether that's orientation of spend or its strategic creative services. Is there a change, Lisa, in your opinion, as you're going through moments of great disruption, of how you look at agencies, the partners you have, what you bring in-house and how you set that up? Do you think it's different when you go through moments of real disruption to, let's say, peacetime agency services?
Well, a bit like what you're talking about with bravery, the question that then that invites is, I am not ready to go over the threshold of in-housing things yet. So at a different point in the maturity curve, you go from more things outsourced because I can kill that spend when I need to, I've got more optionality, versus the next epoch in that is I'm more solid, so I'm going to bring things in-house if that's more effective or cheaper or gives me more control, and then round around the cycle again. So at this point in time, I'm looking for partnerships and people who bring something that it's just not economic for me to have in-house. And I think part of that comes down to just the humility to say, I don't know when I don't know. And that skill of being, it's a Matthew Syed phrase, being a learn-it-all rather than a know-it-all. I think at a moment like this, the world belongs to the learn-it-all. And woe betide the person that is drifting into know-it-all space without due care and attention, if you like. So I'd say that's probably one of the biggest things. Where are you at, and are you willing to be humble, ask the stupid questions, and buy it in when you need it? Because it's a fool's errand to build an expertise that you don't need.
You've mentioned a couple of times about people. Obviously, it's an interesting point. We're talking about technology, we're talking about AI, but ultimately the impact is on people. So do you see really the conduit to navigating these waters at the moment isn't necessarily about understanding that, the components of the stack, but knowing about the person who is going to audit, make a recommendation, do the right job to get the right marketing stack in place?
I do think it all ultimately comes back down to, there's the capability and the openness of the humans involved, but also the precision with which you're defining the problem, actually. So in this time of some ambiguity, what are we actually solving for helps us to ground ourselves when there's lots of, you use the phrase like shiny things, problems, jeopardy, all of that kind of jazz. The core skill that I'm thinking about building in teams now, and this is something that maybe a regret or a learning that's come a bit later in my career, is building these skills that add up to resilience in the organization. On like a one-to-one level, I like this phrase that your presence has to be bigger than any potential disruption. And I think you can expand that to the organization. Your team's capability has to be big enough to ride any potential disruption. And if you are narrow and you're not building the skills of seeing reality clearly, then that's a problem. If you take it back to what you were talking about around when machine learning became a real thing and effectively disintermediated a lot of manual data science-y type stuff in organizations, that was an interesting point, because you're saying whether you're doing it manually or you're doing it automatically, you can have all the data in the world, but if you're not open, the human lens, to actually hearing what it has to say, you're no better than your competitor. It's this idea of give me the stream of information and then allow me to actually see that and face the harsh truths that it might suggest about how I've been spending my money or what I've been doing in the business. So I think we're back in that kind of place where have you got the human skill to accept the reality that's coming down the track? And it can be learned and built, I think. It doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. One thing which may sound very basic, but I actually think is a very important component is with all of these new tools, pieces of technology coming in, a lot of the people here today will be businesses that are technology-driven businesses. So for us to integrate new pieces of technology, and I say this from personal experience, can be quite a painful and sometimes a long process, right? We may have privacy or data security and compliance, especially if you're a public company. So have you experienced some of the challenges about once you have found this great piece of marketing technology that's going to add so much value, about how do we go about managing that through the business and actually getting it implemented and activated?
Yeah, I mean, I'm smiling because what it brings to mind is, again, mistakes that I've made are ones of impatience, probably. When it comes to integrating new technologies, it's the kind of the optimistic, I'm so bought into the vision of what could happen, I've either oversold it internally, this is going to be making a difference within 6 months, and I should be talking 18 months. So that's one. On the team level, are you actually with reality about how long it's going to take to turn this into something? Or are you straying into the side of over-promising, losing the run of yourself, getting excited? And that's also where your agency partners need to come in. Like, let's be clear about what the bullseye is here, and let's not, frankly, get overexcited about it. Because I just think time, it's the time these things take to properly integrate, particularly when you're being appropriately cognizant of integration risk. You know, the types of companies that you work with that have complex tech stacks, it's not as easy just to roll the dice, run an experiment, and see immediate results and off you trot.
Yeah, I think it puts a lot of pressure on making sure if you're going to go through the time and effort to select the technology, go through a process, have it integrated. You know, if you're then having to wait 3 to 6 months to do that, you need to make sure if that's what the time is going to take, how do I make sure I'm getting the right piece of technology? And then you need to give it the time to make sure it's going to deliver and prove its worth and show the ROI around it. And, you know, for marketeers, it's sometimes quite frustrating, I'm sure, for many people in this room, is we want to do more and be quicker, but there's the challenges around it. I do think maybe there is some potential opportunities through our agency partnerships to maybe navigate that in the experimentation phase, and that may also be one of the reasons why we started augmenting the partners we actually work with. But yeah, it's probably the least sexy point of the technology future, but actually, you know, we do want to get these things integrated and working to show that we are actually driving value around it.
Yeah, that idea of the management or technical debt of doing something quickly and then having to unpick it, I think that's something that, a lesson that, yeah, I've learned a few times, which is doing something quick and dirty to prove a point and underestimating how long it takes to unwind that and integrate it properly. Management debt, technical debt, the same thing.
Is there any departments within the process of getting new technology in that you think is always the one to go to first? Who's the one that is always the barrier, and where should we put our time and efforts in to sweeten them?
The barrier internally. I think it would depend on the complexity of what you're talking about. My mind immediately goes to compliance, ethics, governance stuff because of like public company background, probably. That's where I go to is to not underestimate that and to bring that group in rather than seeing them as a barrier or a blocker or a slowdown. It's like, this ain't going to work unless we are fully gelled. So there's probably like a broader point there around however much time I think I need to invest creating that container internally to say, what are we actually doing? Are we all aligned? Triple it. It will always take longer than you think to just have the spacious conversations that you need to really look at what might go wrong. Because that's ultimately the human bit that we're all responsible for doing, is taking care of proper integration and proper unlocking of the potential. So yeah, however long you think you need to build a container, it'll be longer, is probably a lesson.
I think one of the things about marketeers as well is sometimes we forget to do our internal marketing, right? So
yeah.
I would say you need to almost market to the cross-functional teams, make them think it was their idea. So make privacy, compliance, make them think it was actually their decision. Things will go a lot quicker that way. I want to just tap into excitement, creativity from AI. So I think that's, you know, we've all seen some of the demonstrations. I think probably the one that blew me away more than anything else. But how excited are you, specifically I would say on the creative side of what AI is going to drive, and how do you think from marketeers' perspective we have to navigate that approach and that change?
Yeah, massively actually, and I think we probably have to move through a sea of crap before we get to the good stuff. I think that's the other thing that there's a bit of a herald of, there's going to be a lot of samey stuff out there. So the best tools used to the top of their capability is going to produce some amazing stuff, and there's going to be a lot in the kind of uncanny valley sea of averageness, which is also just part of the proliferation of new technology. So I'm excited about the bit that's over the hump, and I think we've seen this with every channel, haven't we? The kind of the descent into either polarization or sameness every time. So I'm excited, and I am not immune to some of the scare around the kind of big existential risk of AI in its broadest. So there's a kind of, I'm the first to say this is another disruption in a line of disruptions, and there's also a part of me that says, if we ever get to a place, we are moving towards a place of beyond narrow AI into truly generative, on the path to super intelligence, and that's really frightening, I think, existentially. So that's perhaps a tangent for another day, but I don't think we can paddle in those waters without acknowledging the shark.
100%, and I think that's probably what's a little bit different about the AI-driven revolution we're going into, in the fact it isn't just the creative generative AI, it's the operational business impact that artificial intelligence is also bringing at the same time. I'm personally as excited by Microsoft Copilot as I am by the latest incredible content creation, because of the impact it may have on my time, my processes, my ability. And there's a whole number of other things that are happening at the same time as well as that creative aspect. But it's interesting, as you were speaking, and say, like, it's going to be interesting in the next 3 to 5 years if, as AI continues to drive efficiency and actually removes some of the cost barriers in creative and content production, everyone's going to have the access to hyper-personalization, amazing channel implementation at a very cost-effective level. What's the differentiator? Are we ironically going to go back to the Mad Men-esque era where creative is really going to be the absolute key, because everyone else has great creative, has great targeting, has great personalization? How do we stand out? Because we're all trying to get the sale or acquire the customer, retain them. Is it potentially going to go back old school? What do you think, Lisa?
Yeah, I love, and this is where what it gets exciting is, what are we bringing to the party? Because there's a world in which, when things are perfectly automated, that's not actually a world that I want. Like, if you make the really simple analogy of, if I want a specific book and I want it as fast as I can possibly have it, a book's such an antiquated example, why have I chosen a book? But if I want a specific item that I'm shopping for and I want it as quick as possible, why wouldn't I use Amazon or a tool? But there is currently still, in a world of total convenience, this is the parallel, there is still a space for wandering the aisles and seeing what emerges. So I think we just got to hold in this idea of whoever our clients are, what do people actually want to be frictionless, and where is the kind of a fundamental human desire for things to have some friction in them? And how does that apply to your sector or your customer? Because the end game of everything at maximum convenience isn't, I think, where most humans who thrive in community want to end up. And that might not be immediately kind of grokkable if you're fully in the software space, but what's the equivalent? To where's the human value being created? I think that's the invitation. But certainly what I'm spending time with my team now and with other people I talk to is, how attuned am I to the actual customer need, versus how am I moving simply in the direction of more and more convenience? And I think there's something in that for us. And maybe that is Don Draper gazing out of a window equivalent.
Maybe, we will see. Well, look, we're coming to the end of the session, Lisa. So one thing I wanted to kind of finish with as a question is, as we're heading into these interesting, exciting, choppy waters of disruption, what would be that one piece of advice you would give to the audience, the marketeers here, about how best to approach this period of disruption?
I think it would be, what is the human skill that we each need to build in our organization to be resilient and adaptive and to adapt faster than the competitor? Because fundamentally, we're all going to have access to similar sets of tools, and our competitive edge isn't going to be simply what we buy, it's going to be what the humans do with it. So the biggest focus area for me is building the skill of learning for the team so we can learn faster than the competition. So my advice would be, what's the human skill and how do you build it that's going to support all of this stuff?
Brilliant. Well, Lisa, thank you very much for this conversation. It has been great. We are going to now open it up to some questions for the audience. So if anyone has any questions on some of the areas that we've talked about, or any questions really in terms of what the next 3 to 5 years are holding in regards to marketing and technology disruption.
I want to know what you'd spend the 10% on of your experimentation budget.
Oh, without a doubt, it's the Sportradar Marketing Services portfolio, Sportradar Fan ID, Sportradar Ads, and maybe our new paid search.
Sorry, me again. Lisa, you touched very eloquently there on the role of creativity and AI and personalization almost dumbing down consumers, right? And I like your book analogy. So would you say that actually we will end up going full circle in the same way that we're seeing with digital music? The growth of LPs is going through the roof, yet convenience should say that we should stick with digital music. So do you think actually we'll come to a runway fairly quickly with personalization and creativity?
I think there'll be some openings there, and part of our job will be to say, what's the need that's not getting met? I think the music analogy is a great one. The need that's not getting met is that sense of connection with the artist. I think that's what the resurgence of vinyl is speaking to. So what's the equivalent in our sectors? So I think there'll be openings, and they might be niche. That's still a niche concern versus digital streaming, but it's highly profitable. And where are those little pockets going to be? And I think what it requires, is it Smiths who've just gone back into stocking vinyl on the high street? Like, what a retro pairing that is, W.H. Smith and vinyl. But it's an example of someone seeing a pocket of value in an unexpected way. So yeah, it's a brilliant analogy, and I think yes, at least to some extent, and I don't know how soon.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Hi. I was just thinking, as you say, all the mundane tasks start becoming automated and AI, and then all the generative AI creativity and stuff like that, what are you going to task your teams as marketing leaders? What are you going to task your teams with doing? Is it downsizing the teams, or if you keep the same size, what do you want them to be doing with all this extra time?
Love it. Do you want to start?
Shall I start that one and then pass over to you, Lisa? So, I don't see a downsizing personally at this point, but I certainly see a reallocation. And I think, look, we need to be pragmatic enough to say that the changes are going to be quite dramatic. I mean, if we think about how we do create work at the moment, I do fully expect that to change in the future. So if you think about now, we're still relying on, whether that's in-house or agencies, the creative process, the roles that go within that, that will augment. There is no getting away from that. I mean, the one part of the business right now that should be most afraid is the creative production agencies, the filming agencies. You don't need to be spending £5 million to fly to South Africa to shoot a beautiful TV spot anymore. Within 6 months, you can get that with a license for some of the new pieces of technology. So that's changing that immediately, but on a day-to-day level, the change is going to be dramatic. So what is the skill sets, what is the nature, what is the roles you need within a marketing organization to deliver on that? I don't know what the answer of that is, but I do know that marketing at its heart is a growth driver for organizations. We are there to create value for our businesses. We will continue to do that. We are agile. But the nature of the roles, the ways of working will augment. So I think the only way I can say to everyone in this audience is realize that is the case, and think about at what level do I need to consider experimentation, consider to change, but no, it is going to have to change. Don't fear it. I think if we sit back and fear and let it get in, we will suffer. So the question is get ahead of it, make a plan, in a year's time, rip it up, make another plan, but these changes are coming. Roles will change. Youth coming through will bring a whole set of skill sets, embrace them. It is similar to a certain degree of how digital and social came in and changed, but it is on a much higher level and the impact will be bigger. So my personal view is I don't see a great increase or decrease in headcount or marketing expenditure, but I certainly see a reallocation of where those funds are going to go.
Yeah, nice. And the thing something I'm excited about from the automation of the more mundane tasks is this idea that, like, if we get to a world where if I'm asking you to do something mundane, it's actually disrespectful, right? I shouldn't have to. It means my system is wrong or I'm not deploying tools that are readily available. Like, if we get to a place where waste reduction equals job jeopardy, I think that's a horrible outcome, and it's actually a way that will resist progress. It's something that Toyota in the lean manufacturing stuff is all about waste reduction, and one of their principles is to keep it human. And if you end up with something rubbish on the conveyor belt in the manufacturing plant, like, the manager should be apologizing. I'm sorry I set up the system such that you had to deal with that. And I think there's a parallel here for, I'm sorry you had to do this menial thing that I should and could have automated out because these tools are endemic now. I think that's a lovely vision of a more respectful workplace powered by the waste reduction tools.
Brilliant. Do we have any other questions from the audience? So we have a couple, one to the back and one to the front, I think.
Hi, yes. Adam, you talked about, or one of you did, about how in the early days things were really siloed and public affairs was down the hall and marketing was in a box and so on and so on. What do you think that the disruption and the technological change you've been discussing so interestingly means for future integration across communications and marketing disciplines, above, below the line, the whole mix? And how do you see companies thinking about that more holistically to drive growth?
Lisa, I think that was you. Do you want to take it first and I'll come in after?
So in terms of how the different teams interact, the only thing that's certain is more openness and willingness to be surprised by where ideas come from. I think when we're in these moments of ambiguity, and I'm thinking back to the person who seized upon the resurgence of vinyl opportunity, the companies that win are the ones that have the environment that allows those pops of insight and those ideas to come from anywhere and actually be heard. You're getting cross-functional teams around a table is step one, but are people actually listening to each other is step two. I think that's another human skill that we can be intentional about building. Like, that cross-functional group can be around a table, 12 people, for example, but if there's no safety to share, you don't get 12 ideas, you get one, the loudest person's opinion. So I'd be saying at these moments, more cross-functional conversations, but with an emphasis on, am I actually listening? And building that skill internally, specifically because I don't know where the next great idea about, are we capturing this value stream or are we seeing reality clearly, is going to come from.
One point I'll make, and it's sometimes not talked about, which is the impact of the budget that the agency and the media agency specifically is going for, and how they're commercializing and protecting themselves, sometimes slows down innovation. And I'll be real practical. I remember when social was really kicking in, at that time, media agencies were still really controlling strategy and channel strategy. And actually, they artificially slowed things down because they knew the moment it was going into Facebook and Meta and Snap and Twitter, it was taking away the money and the rates that they were making. And the creativity and the ideas were coming from PR and comms and experiential and integrated agencies. And it wasn't until really the big WPP, predominantly driven media agencies were getting their commercial deals that they kind of allowed the budget to go into where it needs to be and where it is right now. And that's the other thing we're going into, is there's going to be a lot of disruption not only on us and on the client side, but there is on the agency side within those roles. And ironically, that understanding and that disruption is potentially something that has to be navigated. And as clients, I think we need to make sure we're probably going to have to take more responsibility to make sure that we are innovating and looking at channels and looking at technologies, maybe even more so than we've done previously, potentially even sidestepping the traditional agencies and media agencies and just having the right partners that we're going to do in terms of our own marketing in the years to come.
Hi, so I'm quite interested in this point about upskilling your teams that you both have talked about. Do you think that there are enough companies out there or training organisations offering the right sort of courses? Or do you think it's too early even to understand what skills we need, therefore no one's offering it? Or there's a proliferation of so many different courses you could do, but nobody really knows where you should go with that?
You're on the vanguard, so I'll pass that to you.
The answer is yeah. Look, there's some really good, especially in the marketing field, and I think actually in the UK we're really blessed with some of the trade bodies who, the IPA, the CRM, have fantastic qualifications and courses. I think we just need to be practical. Is we are moving so fast that if you try and specialise in any role, realistically it's going to be outdated, not even in a year, in probably 6 months. So I think the real question at the moment when it comes to education and learning is more, coming back to some of the things Lisa was talking about earlier on, is what is the skill sets that I need to navigate change, rather at this point becoming an expert in one particular area. I would say the one exception may be on the creative and the design side, where I think prompt design is fundamentally important as a design skill for designers and art directors on the creative side. I think that's a very important bit of job security, skill set development that I would advise anyone who's working in the creative side to invest in. Everything else, we probably just need to understand what is the skill set, the resilience I need to kind of navigate those waters.
I love that, yeah. And you are absolutely at the vanguard on the technology stuff. I'm almost going the other way, or the ground that I feel safer on is like that timeless skill of just can I be present even when I'm really scared about something that I don't understand yet. So there's like, how do you give your teams a blend of the cutting edge, and I love the prompt design one, that makes so much sense, versus the kind of the skill of just groundedness and staying solid when all about you are losing their head. I just have a sense in a lot of sectors that's actually going to be a bit of a competitive edge, because everyone's facing the same chaos. It's who's able to be most with it. And the best place to learn those things are like, you need to go back to ancient times, meditation. These are things that are sort of, the total opposite end of the spectrum, just to play devil's advocate there.
Right, I think we have time for one final question, and we do have a hand up over there.
Sorry guys, you both touched upon technology and AI quite a lot. Where do you see virtual reality fitting in marketing?
Do you want me to kick that off, Lisa? Pure virtual reality at the moment, I think, is quite far off from having a real material impact at scale. And I would liken it a little bit to how, remember how we went from HD, high definition TVs, and we went into 3D. But there was a time when everyone was trying to sell the 3D TV as the next big thing. But no one really thought about the practicality of that, in the fact that families are sitting around, they don't all want to be wearing 3D glasses at one time to see a communal experience. It was almost forcing the technology and a behavior that wasn't natural and wasn't ready yet. And I see full VR, virtual reality at scale at this point there. I do see augmented reality and mixed reality in a much better position for the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, with a lot of capabilities, because it starts to remove some of those full soulless barriers about where it is going to go. I generally do think longer term, and it needs some hardware development, but the long-term potential of VR, especially on a global level, is astronomically exciting. But behaviorally and technology, we're not there yet to take full advantage of it. When it does kick in, from a marketing perspective, it is very, very rich, very, very exciting when you combine it with advancements of first-party data, immersive experiences, and the ability to really drive commerce from an in-VR experience. But we are quite far off, I think, from really properly taking advantage of it. It's a bit of a gimmick experientially at the moment rather than a really scaled channel and technology. Anything from that, Lisa?
Yeah, so I mean, in the property sector where I am now, part of the challenge is to help people visualize things that aren't built yet. And so there's lots of playing around the edges with VR. And I think the thing that, as you said, always gets in the way is this idea of it's an individual experience with a physical barrier in the way. And until we crack that, adoption's going to be, it's gimmicky, as you say. And I think that leads on to like a broader point, which is the people that can harness tools in a way that support collective experiences, I think are really going to be tapping into something. You know, we're seeing this, there's a lot of chat about this at the moment, the kind of reversion to people's desire for true community and connection. So how do you harness whatever domain of technology you're talking about in a way that supports that, like fundamental timeless human need? That's what VR hasn't cracked yet because of a hardware issue. And I think you can probably extrapolate that to lots of new technologies. The people that crack this community connectedness angle are going to make a lot of money.
And one thing I'd say, not VR, but 360 content for sport and for live theatre, that is interesting. So having that 360 environment where you use a visor to experience it, that unlocks ticketing potential, commercialization potential, global potential. That is very interesting. Not necessarily the VR experience, but the 360 content experience. The biggest barrier of that at the moment is the rights. Once they sort out the rights management around that and how they manage it with broadcast, I do think there's something very interesting in that, and that will unlock a lot of advertising and marketing opportunities within 360 content. Right. Well, look, firstly, everyone, thank you very much for listening. Firstly, I want to say thank you to Lisa for a fantastic conversation. And thank you very much for this session. I think Mike's going to come up and wrap everything up.